Hello there, Kevin. Nice to see you again. Let's continue this discussion around my article on the American political psyche. You remember in part one, we discussed about two dualities that help to explain this reckless and ultimately self-defeating behavior of the US government, of Washington, of the federal government, right? One was this dichotomy, you could say, between immanence and transcendence, how these interact in a very peculiar way in Washington and in particular in the White House. And then the second one was about old and new, the way that the US government and even at a constitutional level, historical level, is a very interesting and actually not so healthy combination of old and new. And this somehow points to the fact that the United States has not evolved at all in the same way that the Western nations in Europe have modernized politically. In the United States, there has been the old that has remained because we have basically in the United States a situation in which the Constitution has been judged as being sacred, right? So we have never tried to touch the Constitution. There have been a few attempts, but at the same time, the United States is very new. It's like an adolescent, as we discussed, right? It's very new in its outlook. It doesn't have the rich history and experience of the European nations. And I don't want to point out, I want to point out that that's not only negative, because if you are young, if you don't have this burden of history, this can also be something positive, right? So there is something positive in this as well. But being an adolescent with so much power is, of course, also a drawback. It's a drawback for the world, and it's also a drawback for the United States themselves. And they keep making all these mistakes. Turns out they're not always mistakes for the military-industrial complex, but they are certainly mistakes even for Washington on the longer term. So what I wanted to do now is I wanted to talk about the third duality, and this is the one about feminine and masculine. So let me
Can I make a
share
comment
here.
before we get onto that?
Sure, sure.
I would like to frame the old young as mature and immature. And one thing I was thinking about, maturity comes from often defeat and hard times, difficulties. And to be honest, since the Great Depression, the US really hasn't suffered very much, whereas Europe has gone through many crises. And so, in a way, the US has grown kind of older and very wealthy, but has had everything, and in part because of the Great Depression. The Great Depression created a spark of energy and renovation that led to the victory in World War II, and then the domination of the globe. And so the U.S. is now getting old in the sense that it's accumulated so much wealth and is losing kind of energy, but it never really captured the maturity of that, for example, a military defeat brings. And even if we consider the Iranian adventure a military defeat, it's not going to be felt very deeply in the American psyche because
No.
it's so distant and not that many people have we didn't lose that many people. It's more of like a political kind of game where Trump lost, Trump won, like that, as opposed to really bringing any kind of maturity
Of course,
into the equation.
geostrategic defeat, which this is, and which is going to have huge ramifications, is not necessarily a defeat for the American civilization, for the United States. The United States being so big with such a huge internal market, and most people are not even aware of what's going on because they can't even place
Exactly.
Iran on a map, right?
Exactly.
So that's exactly right. I fully agree with you. And the only way there can be a renewal, I guess, a real renewal, is if there is a political crisis. And the political crisis, real political crisis in the United States must be economic, because in the end, what really matters in the United States is money. It is really the economic parts. Unless you have a real economic crisis or difficulty, can be connected to energy, can be connected to AI, can be connected to interest rates and debt, right? But unless you have that, you're not going to have any kind of major political change in Washington, and that's why I think your point about the depression and the political consequences of the depression are extremely important. So that's right. So now let's get to the feminine and the masculine. So of course, when I talk about feminine side and the masculine side of the American psyche, I'm talking here about more the psychological part, the archetypes, right? It doesn't mean that we see women exactly in this way or that we see men or the masculine exactly in this way. But if you look at the archetype, what is feminine and what is masculine, there are some conceptions that are lying deep inside of us, inside of our cultures, for what is feminine and what is masculine. And of course, a healthy society needs a combination of both the masculine and the feminine. And here we see, if we look at Washington, that there is there is this feminine side of the U.S. political culture, a kind of naive moral judgment, right? This
Hmm.
good guy versus bad guys can be a kind of, let's say, judgmental feminine side, a this kind of fanatical desire to improve the world, to make it better. Think of Samantha Power, right? That's the typical kind of let's say, feminine do-gooder that is using moral judgments in order to try to justify uh, going out into the world and imposing yourself on the world. Um, so
I
it,
think
it
there's a strong justification to see the nation, la nación, as feminine, because in Latin languages and often in our the way we speak of Mother Russia, Marion, the symbols of the nation are quite often women. So I think that you're very justified in seeing the nation as a female archetype. Obviously, it's made up of men and women, and any healthy psyche, as you were saying, combines, integrates both the feminine and the masculine, but hopefully in a mature way and not in an immature way.
yes, I fully agree. I think some nations, though, tend to have more of this feminine identification with a nation than others. I think France, Italy, Italia itself is a feminine name, right? France is also a feminine name, as is
The
Russia
Latin
in
languages,
Russian,
yeah.
right? They are feminine even in their names. But I think if you go to the concept of nations, of the Germanic nations like Germany, the Anglo-Saxon nations, there is not as much femininity in these nations, I think, as in the others I just mentioned. But it's true what you're saying. So it
I
also
think it,
manifests itself in this kind of busy interventionist spirit, obsessed with doing good. So this kind of unrelenting efforts in Washington, but also
yes,
kind
I
of
think
endearing simple-mindedness, right? To look at politics, which is very complex, to look at politics in a really kind of Manichean way, right? Black and white, simple-mindedness, the good guys or the bad guys win, lose. It's always very much this kind of dichotomy and this binary view, which I sort of associate a bit more with the feminine. Maybe some women won't like that too much, but I do. Doesn't mean that men cannot have this way of thinking as well. It's not about individual men or individual women, but I tend to see this kind of binary view as a little bit more of a feminine side.
it's starting to remind me of Nietzsche, master morality and slave morality, which he would, in a way, say the master morality is
Yeah,
just power. So what you're saying is good guys versus bad guys. It's almost like mission salvatrice, or kind of missionary. The idea of going out to and saving the natives or whatever, even though that could be a male, it seems to be the true male impulse is just to conquer, to rape and pillage, to be
exactly.
abrupt. And so, yes, the instinct to cover it with moral coatings could be seen as a feminine archetype.
Yeah. And then the problem here is that there is this combination, this dangerous combination with the masculine side. This masculine side that you also experience very clearly coming out of Washington, this brutality, this brutal, practical, very practical energy, right? What women
Yes.
often complain that men are very just practical, right? That has a lot of advantages, but it's very practical, mending the fence, mending the car, drinking its
Yeah.
beer, watching TV. It's all very practical, not as much as that, let's say, anchored in idealism. It's really this kind of powerful materialistic drive focused on efficiency, technology, and economic expansion. So this kind of manly trait is pragmatic, often indifferent to history or tradition, and solely focused on achieving visible, measurable success. This kind of KPI of the male consultant, right? It's very, very typical as an image. And that's really, of course, the source and also the drive for America's immense industrial and political power. Um, so, um, so basically, I think that this is actually a marriage of extremes. And actually, if you go to the United States, there is, for a European going into the United States, there is a kind of extreme, a radicalism, which you don't find to the same extent when you are in the, let's say, the more subtle political atmosphere that exists in Europe. Maybe not always so subtle nowadays, right? But because I think Europe has lost a lot. But this is what I wanted to talk about. Of course, it's possible to go deeper, but I think it's important to mention this duality as well. It's another way of understanding this American drive for expansion, which has both this feminine side as well as the masculine side. So, anything else you wanted to add on this point?
Yeah, I would just make a reference to Carl Jung and that in his theory, women have an animus. They have a like a shadow man within them that they need to integrate, and men have an anima, a shadow woman.
Right.
So if the nation state is a woman, then we're talking about an unintegrated animus. And so what you were saying is like the masculine side is problematic too, fits into the Jungian theory that America hasn't properly integrated its the animus. And one thing I would say is that because of America's great power, great arrogance, is that men tend to behave better when they're around equals, when they have to be polite, because if they step out of line,
Yeah.
violence could arise. Whereas America feels it's untouchable, and in some ways it is. Look at this war where it was barely America wasn't hit. And so, as the power of the rest of the world rises, America is going to be forced into a more compromising attitude. And perhaps we're seeing the first sign of this with this MOU with Iran. Okay, it's very early days, but you never know. Maybe we're going towards a better direction now.
Yeah. And of course, all of these military achievements or semi-achievements, or at least disruptions caused by the United States, they are very visible, right? They're very spectacular. But we must not forget that the way that the United States has been spreading its influence and its power and its dominance around the world has mostly not been military, because the military advantages
Of
have
course.
generally not been so successful in spreading US dominance. I would say that the biggest success has been less military, maybe less masculine in a way. It has been the promotion of the US dollar. It has been commercial successes, spreading its legal system, basically this extraterritoriality. And also the cultural part, spreading the idea of the United States as a benevolent power. This has fooled a lot of people for a long time. Maybe that's coming to an end now. But I just want to point out that we need to look a little bit under the hood because we tend to get so excited and worried about these military achievements or semi-achievements, while the real spread, sometimes nefarious spread of US influence doesn't happen militarily. It happens in these other areas, commercial, legal, cultural.
Absolutely.
So thanks a lot, Kevin, and let's continue on another topic next time. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you.